everyone, my name is Anna Fender and welcome to the Crime and Criminal Justice channel. Today we have an incredible show lined up for all of you. Our college intern, Robin Banks, has made a remarkable discovery. She has created the first ever operational time machine.
Hi everyone, Robin Banks here. This is the time machine I've been working on for 3 years now, and it's finally complete. I'm so excited to use it on today's segment of the show. Now, this is a historical moment because we've used this time machine before, but never before has it been used live on TV. Can't wait for you guys to see how it works.
We'll be introducing a new segment on our show today using the time machine in order to interact with some of the best theorists in sociology's history. They each come from different backgrounds and have their own way of explaining events in a sociological view. But first, of course, we need a story. Jemima, a 22-year-old woman, has been in trouble with the law most of her life. Growing up, her parents ran a drug house out of their home since she was 2 years old. At age 10, she was suspended for fighting, and again suspended at age 12 when she brought a knife to school. She gained the reputation of a troublemaker and was kicked out of the art club for her actions. Now as an adult, she demonstrates little career aspiration and hangs out with friends, dealing and doing drugs. Since her mother has passed, she has been using drugs to cope with the pain of her loss. Today, I will be talking to 5 theorists who will apply their theoretical viewpoints on this scenario. Through the ideas of strain theory, control theory, differential association theory, labeling theory, and routine activity theory, these 5 theorists will each try to explain the life and events of Jemima. First up, we have Robert Merton.
Thanks for having me, Anna. As you know, I coined the strain theory in the 1930s. By using the strain theory lens, it makes me believe Jemima can be viewed as a retreatist. She rejects both goals and means and does not want to deal with the pressure. She gives up trying to differ from her family and gives into the stereotype she had been given, becoming a drug addict. Based on my knowledge of these situations and of Jemima's situation, I can confirm with confidence the retreatist aspect of my strain theory seems to fit exceptionally well to best describe this scenario. In my theory, I talk about the term anomie, which differs from that of Durkheim. My context of this term is that society inadvertently puts pressure and stress on the individual, which can ultimately lead to rule-breaking behavior, as visible in Jemima's case. The stress and pressure she had came from being blamed by her teachers for acts that she may or may not have committed. This leads to the individual to take on the retreatist persona by rejecting the cultural goals and any way of achieving those, and thus descending into a life of delinquency.
Robert, thank you so much for joining us today and explaining Jemima's life and events through the ideas of strain theory. Next up, we have Travis Hershey, who will be explaining a little bit of why he thinks Jemima's life could be explained through control theory.
Thank you for having me. Control theory essentially offers a justification for why people obey rules and how we conform to them. Jemima has weak involvement as she was part of an art club at her school, but was ultimately kicked out because of her poor activity and behavior. With this in mind, she then turned to her friends, which she grew attached to, resulting in poor friend group dynamic with a negative influence on her who progressed her involvement in the world of drugs and illegal activities. My perspective agrees with that of strain theory, in that understanding the causes of crime include the awareness that society plays a fundamental role in shaping the criminal. That being said, we can see this in how she was raised. She was raised around drugs her entire life, therefore turning to drugs is not surprising. Where control theory differs, however, is that society has institutions that act to control or regulate the rule-breaking behavior. This means humans are by nature risk takers, meaning they will satisfy desires in the easiest and sometimes criminal ways. The social bonds that the individual has with society regulates the criminal behavior. If weak, it's more likely to be criminal, and opposite, if it's strong, it'll be less criminal.
Looking at Jemima's life through control theory definitely gives us a new perspective. Thank you, Travis Hershey. Next up, we have Edwin Sutherland, who will be explaining Jemima's life through differential association theory. Thank you for having me on the show, Anna. Similar to other sociological theories regarding crime, differential association theory believes that the actions of humans are largely based around their environments. With regards to my theory, I suggest that criminal behavior is learned. Through reviewing Jemima's case, I can observe that she grew up surrounded by poor influences, and she grew up in a world where drugs and violence were normalized. With her mother passing away, it is not far-fetched that Jemima would also turn to drugs to cope with her pain. She watched other people doing that while she grew up. In my theory, I also point out that since crime is not believed to be due to brain damage or abnormalities, one must have learned to act in criminal ways due to an environment that demonstrated it was favorable. As I mentioned previously, she grew up watching her family and her mother do drugs. Parental figures are very influential for a child's development. If she is witnessing others do drugs, she is very likely to turn to drugs to cope with pain as well, which is exactly what she is doing in her case. To add, she will then associate with those who will relate to her life, which would be her friends who also deal and do drugs. Thank you, Edwin, for joining us today. Now we are switching over to another Edwin Lemert, who will be speaking to us about labeling.
Hi, Anna. Thank you for inviting me to take place in such an important news segment on the show. Well, let's get into it. Labeling theory, to sum it up, is essentially what label or target is placed on an individual. It is how others in society view them. For example, in Jemima's case, they label her as a troublemaker because of her family and their history with criminal activity. There are two main approaches to my version of labeling theory, those being primary and secondary deviance. In Jemima's case, I believe she would be associated with secondary deviance. This is because her deviant behavior was not caused by one single event. She experienced drugs, guns, and violent behavior all throughout her life. This caused her to internalize her negative label given to her by her peers. She now views herself as a problem child with a drug addiction. She has now assumed the deviant identity of herself, resulting in more deviant behavior. She gives into her master status, allowing it to become self-fulfilling prophecy. Delinquents or criminals, through the process of social interaction, conform to the labels that have been conferred to them by their peers in society, resulting in a deviant human usually reoffending in criminal aspects. Thank you again for having me on the show.
Thank you again to Edwin Lemert for joining us and speaking to us a little bit about labeling theory. Finally, I'd like to welcome Marcus Felsen, who will be speaking to us about routine activity.
Hey Anna, it's great to be here. This theory is closely related to rational choice theory. The theory suggests that a level of crime in society are closely related to changes in one's own lifestyle. Unlike stricter control theory, however, my theory simply focuses on the premise that crime is likely to occur when a motivated offender and a suitable victim come together in an environment that does not protect the potential victim. We don't focus on why an offender is motivated. We focus on the lack of guardian, suitable target, and motivated offender. The way that this connects to Jemima's situation is that she went through a big life-altering and life-changing event, having her mother die due to a drug overdose. This would be hard on anyone at any age. Since she is currently 22, she has experienced this behavior thus far and has since mentioned before that a life-altering event does tend to lead to criminal behavior. As mentioned in her situation, the life-changing event would be her mother dying due to a drug overdose. She turned to drugs to cope with the pain of her mother's loss. Another point of this theory is that teenagers who commit crimes are not necessarily motivated all the time. Most of the time, they're just tempted to do so. With teenagers, parental supervision is key to crime prevention. Freedom from parental control or from parental supervision has resulted in people getting into trouble more often. Her upbringing and deviant behavior throughout school is connected to parental supervision. I am to assume that since her mother was a drug user, Jemima was neglected as a kid. As horrible as this may be, it does tend to happen. This is resulting in low parental supervision, thus creating the temptation, the opportunity, and the means for Jemima to be able to commit crimes without sort of any repercussions.
Thank you again to Robert Merton, Travis Hershey, Edwin Sutherland, Edwin Lemert, and Marcus Felsen for all speaking to us today. A very special thank you to our college intern, Robin Banks, for making this all possible. Join us next week on another special episode where we discover more about crime and criminal justice. Once again, my name is Anna Fender. Thank you for joining us today.